Hello and welcome to Quilt Addicts Anonymous. I'm Stephanie Soebbing. Today we're going to be working on a brand new free motion quilting design using full line stencils to help us get it just right. And today we're going to be tackling the elusive feather border. I know that feathers can seem really intimidating and scary, and that's because they are when you try to do them freehand. I took tons of classes and practiced and drew everything out, and I could never do them just right. They were all really funky and weird and didn't look good, and some of them would go in opposite directions than they were supposed to, and it just was bad until I discovered full line stencil. And there's something about having that line to follow to where I can get a feather that looks like it's supposed to, and then I can follow this fun design. This is more of a modern feather because the feathers are different sizes as they go through it, and then there's two different border sizes to choose from, so it's a really good versatile one to use on your quilts at home. So I'm going to get started with this large border stencil, and I'm going to show you how to mark it and how to fill and prime. We'll talk through how to fill and prime your Pounce Pad. We have lots of videos that go through all of this. So if you really like these and you're intrigued, check out our playlist on Quilting the Quilt, and you can see and get inspired to do lots of new designs on your home sewing machine. This also works on a long arm, but you work really great on your home sewing machine. So let's get started. So the number one issue people have when they get these is they say it doesn't work, and it's because they haven't primed the Pounce Pad correctly. So I'm going to talk you through how to do it here. What you're going to do is this pops off like a bank topper from when you were a kid, and then the chalk powder, you're going to fill it all the way to the brim, and then you're going to bang it 50 times against a hard surface like you are really ticked at somebody, like your significant other just did that thing that they always do even though they know it irks you. Bang it 50 times hard. And then if you're filling it for the first time, you're going to repeat that process. But if you're just doing a refill, you can just bang it to 50 times and you're good. What you're looking for is that your chalk pad is nice and saturated. You can see there's a whole lot of blue on here. And that means that when you swipe this across, it's going to transfer through these lines. The stencil is different than the ones that you see that are plastic and hard and not flexible at all like this one. It's essentially the same thing you would use if you were screen printing a t-shirt, and instead of ink going through these mesh lines, the chalk goes through and it leaves this design marked on your quilt top until you need it, or as long as you need it, and then you go on from there. You generally don't want to mark more than, like, say, one side at a time because it will come off as you quilt it. And if you mark your whole quilt top, it's going to be all gone before you get to that point. So I generally just quilt the section, or mark the section I'm working on, and then when I'm done with that, I'll mark the next one. So we're going to get started on this larger border here. The larger border is just a hair under 4.5 inches wide. So it would be great for like a 5-inch border. That would be fabulous, or even anything a little bit bigger than that, and then you can come back and do some echoes or quilting around it. This one here is just a hair under 3 inches, so this would be perfect for a 3-inch border. These stencils are also fully reversible, so if you don't like the way the direction of anything is going, you can always swap that around, and it's really easy to make some changes there. I'm gonna have mine going this way. This is technically upside down because I'm gonna show you how to turn the corner as well, and I want this little bit here to fit right in there as I turn this corner. So let's get started. So when I'm marking this, what I do is I put my hand on the bottom just to kind of hold everything still and steady. And then even though it's a Pounce Pad, you're tempted to want to pounce it, like bang it. But what you want to do is swipe it. And that will just allow that chalk powder to settle through that mesh and create that fun design. Now before I just go ripping this off, what I typically do is I will peel back a little bit to make sure that it has transferred well. It looks like I can do a little bit more up top there, because it's always easier to just lay it back and get it close enough to where it should be rather than try and lay the whole thing back down. All right, so that's looking pretty good. Now we've got some registration marks here. So if I were going to continue on and do an entire border, what I would do is I would pull back this registration mark. It kind of looks like a target, and I would just line it up right on top of there, and I can see that this mark here ends right where this feather line comes off. So that's great if you're doing borders and you just want to keep going, going, going. We're going to actually turn it though. Since I'm working on a plain fat quarter here, so you guys can really easily see the quilting and how to do this, what I did is I just drew a 5-inch border here. And so it might be hard to see on camera, but there's a line here and a line here, and that'll help give me the illusion of actually having a border. So what I can do there is I can kind of peel this back a little bit and make sure that I'm going to be inside of that. It's going to be easier to see if you're doing it on an actual quilt because you're going to be able to see through to the backing. And what I'm doing here is I'm ignoring this registration mark and I'm just kind of bringing this in until the beginning of this one is about even with the end of where this loop is. And I'm going to do a little bit of wonkiness as I go around there. Obviously I'm not going to follow the line exact, but it's going to be pretty close. What I am kind of doing though is I'm lining these targets up with the line that I drew to make sure that they are nice and even. So that's a really good way to continue to use those. All right, so let's go ahead and swipe across. Peel it back, make sure it transferred well. Again, we could do just a smidge more over here. All right. So now we've got a nice turn. It doesn't work exactly as it normally would, because normally we would just keep going up here. But what I'm going to do is when I come up here, I'm just going to come over and work this that way. So there's a couple of ways to do feathers. This one is kind of a travel-y bump back method. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start down here and I'm going to sew into the center, and then I'm going to travel up through this part and then come over back to the center, and then I'm going to do the other half. So I'm going to do that, travel, and come up, and then I'm basically just going to keep working that as I go, doing 1/2 and 1/2, and then always traveling back either on that spine or along a bit of a feather. So you are going to have to try to get as close to that line as you can to stay on top of it. But here's the great part. If you're off on every single one, then that's a design choice. It's not a mistake. So keep that in mind as you are doing this and practicing, that it doesn't have to be completely perfect. Because these lines are going to go away. No one's going to know where you were supposed to be. And as long as it looks halfway decent, you're going to be just fine. And also, even this gap in between here, that's going to look totally normal because there are gaps in between the sections of the feathers. So it looks totally normal to have turned the corner in this way. So let's get started. I'm going to get my machiner's quilting gloves on, my darning foot or my free motion foot on my machine, lower my feed dogs, or you can reduce your stitch length to 0, and then we're going to get moving. One other note, if I were quilting this for real, I would position my hands like this on either side of the area that I'm quilting on. But since I want you guys to be able to see what I'm doing, I quilt kind of like this. So that way you can have a clear view of what is happening, but you should always quilt with whatever you can fit in between your hands. I always start with bringing that top thread down and back up again. That way I can pull my bobbin thread to the top. One other thing you want to make sure you do is make sure that the quilt is not dragging against your body. You want this part to be up, otherwise the chalk will come off on you instead of stay on until you are done quilting it. All right, I'm going to stitch in place a couple times to secure those threads, and then I'm just going to start going around. The challenging part about doing borders is that in this case, because I'm just doing a sample piece and I didn't give myself extra backing and batting to hang on to, is I don't have a ton of real estate here to help guide that quilt. Now, if I would have left the extra 5 inches on all sides like I'm supposed to, that would be another story. So that's one really great reason why you always want to make sure you leave extra. All right, so I've got that first one good to go. I'm going to come back to the center spine here and just stop with my needle down for a second. And now I need to kind of reevaluate. I've got to come down here and start doing that swoop. And I need to try to travel as close on that line as I can. And remember that you are the stitch regulator when you're quilting on your home sewing machine. You are the one making the stitch lengths as a combination of how fast you are moving the sewing machine to how fast you're moving your fabric. So So you notice I'm going pretty slow here. That's because feathers, like I said, you know, are not the most easiest thing for me to do. I can't just do them freehand like I can some other designs. So I just want to be really slow and deliberate until I kind of get in my groove here. Eventually I'm going to speed it up, and typically your feathers do kind of get a little softer and less bumpy on the edges once you do feel comfortable enough to speed up. All right, so I'm back to that spine, so now I'm going to switch to the other half of the feather and work on that. No traveling required here. I'll try speeding up a little bit. Now I'm feeling a little bit more comfortable. I've done 2. Another great reason why it's nice to work on a practice piece first, because then you can get all your concerns and everything out ahead of time. All right, we're coming back to that spine. I'm not going to go too far down the spine because I just have to turn right back around, travel up the feather I just quilted. Now I'm bumping out to the next one and working my way back to that spine. All right, so we got our first one done. This is a really great time to pause, kind of evaluate where you're going next and see what you want to do here. In this case, it looks like I've got a nice little feather to come around here that is just kind of all on its own, so we're going to do that guy first. This is where I'm at, by the way, so I'm going to come and I'm just going to do that feather, and then I'm going to move on to work the others in the same manner that I did those. All right, I did something not so great there. What I should have done was stop after I did that feather and reposition my hands, because I totally lost control when I was getting to this point. And this last feather, not looking so hot because of it, because I just didn't have control of the fabric. I was trying to hold it with the side of my hand. It was not working. So you don't want to stop in the middle of a curve, because then it's hard to have it continue to be smooth. But what I should have done was stopped when I hit the bottom of that stem, repositioned my hands, and then gone out, which is what I'm about to do right now. So I'm going to travel up around the space that I just did, because even though it's not the best curve, if I go way off of it at this point, it's going to be really obvious that I screwed up. So I'm just going to follow that along. And then follow back down to the spine. And at this point, we've got a choice. So I just quilted this part here, and I'm right here. So I can quilt this one, and I probably will, because it's going in this direction before I then head down to the spine. But if you wanted to, you could always head back down to the spine then and do these guys and then move around. But since this one is going in the same direction as I've been going, I'm going to go ahead and quilt this last feather before traveling back down that spine to begin that side. All right, so I'm traveling around the curve that I just completed, trying to stay right on top of that if I can. But again, if you get off a little bit, as long as you're off a little bit on all of them, then that's a design choice. All right, so we're gonna go around this curve and then back to the spine. And now I'm gonna travel all the way down that spine back to the start of the feather on the other side. All right, so now I've come all the way down here, and now I'm going to start working these feathers, and then we're going to make that turn. So this time I'm going to travel on the outside of that feather first, because there's no need to travel up that spine any more than you need to. It's going to get pretty thick with thread if you go over it too many times. So now I'm coming back into the spine. I'm just going to touch it a little bit and then go right back out along the line I just quilted, trying to stay right on top of that if I can. Now I'm going to quilt the other little hump. All right, now here I get to be a little arbitrary with what I do next, because there isn't a true line like coming out here to connect it to the next one. So I'm just going to kind of improvise. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to come along the line of the feather I already have and then start in on my other feather over here. And that I think is going to look good. But again, you can totally improvise because it's not like there's a line to follow, and we're just doing a teeny little bit. And so it's not really going to matter too much if you're not super consistent from one to one. All right. So again, I'm just going to do one side at a time. And I'm going to come back down to that center. All right, so I've hit my spine, and with almost every other quilting design, you're moving side to side, back and forth, because you do not want to be turning this work. That is very challenging to do when you have a large quilt. This is going to be the exception though, because this is a border, and there is no way you're going to fit your entire quilt in here. So what I am going to do is, now that I've quilted going through that first turn, I'm going to go ahead and turn my work, and in theory, this would be just, you know, your extra batting and everything. It wouldn't be more quilt like it looks like in this case. And now I can continue on sewing. So for this one, again, I'm going to quilt along the center of that and then come back to my spine. And it's basically the exact same thing we just did, except now we're going in the other direction because we've turned that curve. All right, so this is what it looks like when it's all done, when I have not removed any of the chalk yet. You can see a lot of the chalk, like the lines part of it, are gone. You're just kind of left with this dusty residue, and it just comes off super easy. I'm just using my machiner's quilting gloves. They are pretty much stained whatever color chalk I was using last. But you can see this turned out really, really great. And the more I did, the better those curves got. So if you were to do this with, say, a sample piece like this, you're probably going to get the hang of it pretty quickly, and then you can go for it on your quilt. The other great thing about this is because you're doing it on the edge, there's not a whole lot of quilt to wrangle underneath your sewing machine, so that makes life a little easier for you. If for some reason this didn't match up perfectly in the corner to make the turn, you would just have to kind of improvise to make that happen. But I'm going to show you next with the little one how you can line that up to ensure that you're kind of starting in your corner and going out. And so at least with one corner, it's going to be fabulous, and then your other three, you know, you'll kind of make it work. But by the time you get to your other corners, you will totally have it down, and you'll be able to improvise to do it just because you'll have developed more of that muscle memory. All right, so let's do that real quick. And also, you know, I'm using white thread so you guys can see what this looks like, but you would want to use a thread that is usually like a shade lighter, works really well for blending. And that way you would just see this texture. And even these ones that were a little funky at the beginning, no big deal. You are good to go because you're just going to see the texture of it when it is all said and done. All right, so I'm going to mark the little one and show you how to get it positioned right up into that corner. And then you guys are off and running and ready to do this on your own. So it might be a little hard to pick up on camera, but I use a friction gel pen just to mark out a 3-inch border here. Again, you're going to see that a lot easier in your actual quilt because it's going to be a 3-inch border. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to line this up so that way the edge is maybe, I don't know, 1/4 inch or so away from that top. And try and make sure that I'm nice and centered over here. And again, way easier to see when you're working on an actual quilt top when you're lining this all up. All right, that's transferred pretty well. I'm a little over here, but I'm not gonna worry about it because this is just a practice piece. But if you were like a little too far over on your regular one, you would just wipe it off and start over and it would be no big deal. All right, so now we've got this is where the reversible part is really handy because my piece ends up here and right now my next feather starts way down here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna flip this over so that way it's a little bit closer to where we stopped, and that way I can kind of scooch that over and kind of get it in line with where we stopped here. And then just get it nice and even down here. And no one will know that I flipped that at all. All right, so now we've got that marked out and it is looking super cute. Again, I got it a little high because I can't really see a friction gel pen through here, but you can definitely see borders and different fabrics through there. And again, if you weren't happy with it, you could just wipe it off and remark. But I am pretty pleased with how that turned out, and it's gonna be nice because I'm gonna do exactly what I did before, where I'm gonna quilt up to here and then I'm just gonna jog over and kind of improvise right there and make that curve and then keep it transitioning and sewing. I'm gonna go ahead and do a little bit of it on camera so you guys can see. I actually find it easier to work smaller like this when I'm working on my home sewing machine. I feel like it's easier to get those curves to be nice and smooth when you're working with smaller pieces than with larger, and I find it the exact opposite on the long arm. On the long arm, I can do these larger curves a lot easier. So it really just kind of depends on what you're using, what your preference is, and what comes more naturally to you. But I'm gonna go ahead and quilt that. But again, it's the exact same thing as we did here, it's just smaller. So I quilted out that smaller bit there. Is it perfect? No, absolutely not. Does it matter? Nope, because I can just wipe that chalk away and nobody knows where the lines were supposed to be. I suppose the biggest tip I can give you, like here, this one I clearly got a little off. It's not a nice smooth curve like this one. So when I was traveling over that a second time then, I made sure to travel along the original line, because if I were to try to correct myself and make it a little bit smoother like this one, then you would tell that I was off. But here it's just gonna look like texture and feathers, and it's really pretty, and a design that previously is very prohibitive and scary and you think only the best quilters can do. Now you can tackle it on your own. And one thing I really kind of want to tell you guys, whenever I do this class in person, we start with like the super basic meander of just a stipple stitch and then a little leaf to teach the curves and the points, because really that's all any quilt designs are made up of, are curves and points. And by the end, they are able to quilt feathers. And it's because these stencils are so great that you've got something to follow. So it takes one less thing away when you're trying to quilting of where am I supposed to go next? Because that is the intimidating part when you're starting to learn how to quilt on your home sewing machine or your long arm. It's what do I do next? And this tells you, you got those lines to follow. And if you don't follow them perfectly, no big deal, the lines go away. As always, we have got everything you need to go along with this over on our website, shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. You can get the Pounce Pads, you can get this stencil and many others. This one is called the Feather Border by Ann Bright, and it comes in the 2 sizes, one that's perfect for that 5-inch border and one that's perfect for the 3-inch border. And you can really have a lot of fun with this. And again, it's about building that muscle memory. Once you have that muscle memory built, then you can change this up and size it, or you could have some fun with it and maybe do some echoes around here to sort of fill it in more. So you've got a 6-inch border and you need some filler in there. But this is your foundation. This gets you going. It gives you the confidence to do it well, and then you can go from there. Well, thanks so much for following along. If you enjoyed this video, we have lots of others on free motion quilting with stencils and ruler work. So just check out our free motion or quilting the quilt playlist. I'll link that in the video description down below. And if you like this and you want to give it a go, a great way to say thanks for all these free videos is to get the supplies from us. We appreciate it. We're a small family business, and you help keep these free videos coming when you get your project supplies from us. So thanks so much, and until next week, happy quilting.